Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stay, and today's show is brought to you by the people who keep this show going. And those are our patrons over on Patreon and our academates on the Bestseller Academy. Now, if you want to get involved with the Academy, the doors are opening soon, but you can go and check it out now. You can sort of have a look around, have a nose around. Go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. You can register your interest. You can get on the list there. You can have me and Mr. D as your tutor. Imagine that. Or if you want to support us on Patreon, pop over to Patreon and there's a support button on our website. You can find out there's loads of extras, hours and hours of extra stuff over there. And check it out and keep the show going. Mr. D, how are you?
I'm doing well, and it's getting ever closer to that 400th episode, isn't it, Mr. Stay?
The live show. The live show is coming, as announced in last week's episode. We're coming up to 400 episodes of this podcast. Yes, 400. How did that ever happen? And we're going to be celebrating with a special live show that's going to be at Waterstones in Canterbury. You can join me and a panel of amazing writers, including Rowan Coleman, Pernille Hughes, Nadine, Matheson, and Julie Wassmer. After 6 years and 400 episodes, we've been around a bit, and the thing we've never really asked is it writing a job for life? In these uncertain times, can an author really earn a living from just their writing? So our authors share their experiences of being an author in an ever-changing world. Now, Rowan and Julie, they've been doing this for quite some time. You know, you remember Julie came on the show, told us about writing for EastEnders, Rowan's amazing career so far. Then Pernille and Nadine, they're quite new to this. They're 2-3 books into their career. So they're going to be sharing their different perspectives on this. And also, it's a celebration. There's going to be wine. There's going to be cake. There's going to be a chance to meet the authors. I'll be there. There's book signings, lots of surprises, and it's going to be streamed online too. So it's Wednesday, 31st of August, at 6:30 p.m. UK time, Waterstones, Canterbury in person and online. I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can check it all out there.
And if you want to get a reminder by email as well, don't forget to sign up to the Bestseller Experiment newsletter, because we will be actually popping that in the next couple of weeks as well, to get like links to the live show and all that. So make sure you sign up to the newsletter if you want to get notified and reminders as to when it's all happening. So, Mr. Stay, it's been a fantastic week here in Canada. How about in the UK?
Yes, all very good here. I went to the, as I mentioned, I think in last week's episode, I went to the RNA conference. There's lots of conferences and fairs and book fairs going on. A lot of people went to Harrogate Crime Festival, which I didn't go to. And I think anyone who didn't go had definite festival envy, because it seemed like everyone was there. But I went to the RNA, which was absolutely amazing, and met lots of listeners, which was great. I met Steve Gowland and Donna Gowland, and we'll be talking about them at the end of the show in the social media bit as well. It was lovely to meet them. Steve gave me a copy of his new book as well, Fantasy Writers, SC Gowland, he writes. This is amazing. So yeah, it's been great. Been pootling up and down the country, meeting people, going into bookshops, selling books, all that malarkey. It's I'm in that kind of period with all the excitement of Ghost of Ivy Bar. My new book has kind of simmered down, but I'm still it's these people who who don't read it on day one, funnily enough, who actually take a bit of time to read it, and I'm starting to get feedback on it as well, and people are really enjoying it. So it's been a good summer. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, fantastic news. It's fantastic. And it's been a good summer of interviews as well. And we've got an absolute cracker today from someone who grew up in a place that's very dear to my heart, Swansea in Wales. Yeah, where I spent a good number of years of my life overlooking the ocean there. That was great days. But tell us about our amazing author this week, Mark. Mark Ellis.
Mark Ellis, yeah, thriller writer from Swansea, as you say, former entrepreneur as well. And we might touch upon that in the conversation after the interview. But he was very much affected by his parents' experience of the Second World War. His father was in the Navy, and his mother told him stories of watching, Swansea being bombed during the war as well. And so he's had a fascination with World War II and the home front. And he's got this incredible series set during the Second World War, featuring DCI Frank Merlin as he battles against wartime crime. And he's got a new book, Dead in the Water, set in the summer of 1942. And it's absolutely fascinating stuff. So we discuss all sorts of stuff, but we talk about how he immerses himself in research prior to writing a draft. We talk about the best resources for historical research. And of course, because we're British, we discuss the weather.
Of course we do. That's what we have to do, don't we? Absolutely. So let's find out how the weather is with Mark chatting to the really inspiring Mark Ellis.
Mark Ellis, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm very good, Mark, and thank you very much for having me on this wonderful podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure. And we're here to talk about your new book, Dead in the Water, which is the 5th book in the DCI Frank Merlin series. And this series fascinates me because you're writing about the Second World War. I write about the Second World War, particularly the home front as well. You're in London, I'm out in rural Kent. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. But first of all, tell us about Dead in the Water and where we find Frank Merlin in the summer of 1942.
Well, sure. I'll just say in passing that I think your book's set in World War II, a slightly different focus than my books.
Yes, they are a bit.
Although I have to say, I haven't read any, but they sound very interesting. So I'm happy to promote you too, Mark. Okay?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Dead in the Water. Dead in the Water is set in August 1942. So the whole series progresses at 6 to 9 monthly intervals from the beginning of the war. Now this is the 5th book. He's in August 1942. The last one, it's gone January 1940, September 1940, June 1941, December 1941. So now August 1942. Next one's going to be spring 43. You can work out there's going to be a few more books in the series unless I drop dead. And it was always my idea to write a long haul series portraying obviously the fictional crimes that he has to solve and so on, but to set it against as accurate a picture as I could create of life on the home front, and also to have, without being too didactic and boring, a sort of slight running story about what's happening in the war generally.
Because crime, this is something that not a lot, we talk about the home front, we're all in it together, sticking together, rationing, hardship, all that kind of thing. But crime was pretty rampant during the war, wasn't it? You had blackouts, the streets were dark. There were great opportunities for criminals, weren't there?
There were. And when I started out, I used to speak to people about crime, and everyone had a sort of rosy tinted view that criminals in the war must have sort of played along and toned down their activities as part of the stiff upper lip British spirit. And of course, it was, as you say, completely the opposite. Crime in the war years grew about 60% between 1939 and 1945. There were a number of conditions that made opportunities for criminals huge. You mentioned the blackout. There's rationing, which gave huge scope for forgery and theft of ration books, petrol coupons, clothing coupons, etc., etc. Obviously, when Britain was being bombed, that created chaotic conditions which criminals could exploit. And then again, the police were overstretched. They lost a lot of their good men to the army, or the Navy, or the Air Force. And so, they had a great time. There was a criminal called Mad Frankie Fraser. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yes, I know the name.
Yeah, he had his biography or autobiography ghosted. It's quite a few years ago now, but he did the tour of the chat show circuit. I think he was on Wogan or something, and he said, that 4-letter word Hitler. Why did he give in so easy? We were having a great time.
Oh dearie me, Frankie. Let's talk about your protagonist, DCI Frank Merlin, because originally I believe he was supposed to be like a Londoner, a Cockney, but he has a slightly different background, doesn't he? Tell us about him.
Yeah. Originally, I can't actually remember the original name I had for him now, but it was Harry something. But yeah, he was going to be a sort of bog standard London Cockney. I mean, still, he's pretty much a Londoner. I mean, he's born and bred in London. But I was on a holiday in Spain, and I just thought, let's make him slightly more exotic. So I gave him a Spanish father who was a sailor out of Corunna and ended up before the First World War in London and fell in love with a girl, married her. His name was Javier Marino. So he married his wife, Merlin's mother, at some point, and they ran a chandlery shop together. And then at some point, he got fed up with people mispronouncing his name, and he changed his name to Harry Merlin. And Frank Merlin, who'd been born Francisco Merino, became Frank Merlin. And it's a sort of slightly different perspective. I mean, the main impact in the story as it's gone on is that when he's irritated or something, or angry, he can swear in Spanish. That's pretty much the only reference to it. Although there are, I bring in storylines of his family. He's got one sister who's gone to marry a cousin in northern Spain, and in the current book that features to a little extent. So it's there in the background, very, very occasionally in the foreground.
I love the name Merlin because obviously there's a magical thing there, but also it's the engine they put in a lot of the aircraft in the Second World War. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yes. I was aware of that too, but I suppose the thing that came to me was Merino, which of course is a type of sheep. So that has no relevance to his character. But so Merino led naturally to Merlin, but then I was aware also of the engine side of things. So yeah, I'm happy with the name as I chose it now. Sometimes I think you pick names and you think, well, I don't know, I wish I'd gone a different way, but I'm very happy with his name.
Wonderful stuff. Now, the thing with setting this book in summer of 1942 is the Americans have finally shown up. And I don't know about you, Mark, but my books are still set in 1940. And my agent keeps going, can't you just slip one American in there so we can sell the books to the Yanks? Come on, there must have been some. And I'm like, no, there weren't any, especially in rural areas. Is there some sort of relief to have the Americans in here so you can start selling internationally, or has it made no difference to you?
Well, yeah, yes and no. But my first book, I did have Americans in my first book because it was all based on murders in and around the American embassy.
Clever.
The ambassador at that time was Joe Kennedy, and Joe Kennedy's an interesting character from his own right. And although he has a scene. He's actually slightly off stage because when there was a prospect of bombing, he scuttled back to America. And he didn't spend much time here, even though he was the ambassador. But I do have a scene where he's sunning himself on a beach in Florida, talking to his stockbroker, and I have the fun of writing that scene. But yeah, it is quite nice to bring in the Americans now, and they play a major part in the plot of the current book, the new book.
Yes, I saw. And again, you're taking something that I love the way you surprise readers, or at least give readers a new perspective on something, because this isn't just the regular GIs. You've got African American soldiers in there, and there's sort of racial strife between the white and the black soldiers. That's another thing that people tend to gloss over when it comes to the war, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big thing. The racial prejudice was huge, and I'd be wary of what words to use about our own racial prejudice at that time. We didn't have that many black people in Britain at that time, so it was all quite new, and all these people came in, and there was actually quite a lot of shock on the British side at the way American soldiers were treated. There was quite a well-known case in which an American soldier was charged with rape. Rape was a capital offense in the war for the Americans. He was rapidly convicted and sentenced, but the evidence seemed to be very, very flimsy. And where the city of Bath, which is where the alleged offense took place, raised a petition of 30,000 people to review the case, asking the Americans to review the case. And they did. And Eisenhower basically let him off and sent him back to his unit. But I mentioned that in passing. One of the other factors there is, when I say the Americans reviewed it, is that from the period of the current book, legislation was introduced in the House of Parliament to give the Americans complete jurisdiction over any alleged crimes involving any of their people. So one of the storylines in the current book, there is a black soldier who's suspected of something. Merlin starts to investigate, but then he's pulled off because it's when the new regulations come in, and it's taken over by a character I happily admit to borrowing from in the heat of the night, the sort of Rod Steiger character, American, and that's part of the conflict of the story. Is Merlin thinks that the black soldier is innocent. Obviously, the Americans, Rod Steiger character doesn't. And that's one of the principal elements of the plot.
Brilliant stuff.
I'm going sort of back generally. I think when you asked me at the very beginning, what I was thinking about when I started the book, my original concept it's always the same here. I always do my research. The ideas come from my research. And I'm a seat of the pants writer. I don't plan it all out. Mm-hmm. I have a few ideas in my mind and I just get going. But the original concept, I read a biography of someone called Calouste Gulbenkian, who not many people have heard of, but he was at that time probably the richest man in the world. He was famously called Mr. 5%. He had introduced most of the oil firms, American, British, continental, into the Middle East from early on in the 20th century, and amassed a vast fortune. And he ended up living in Portugal during the war. And Lisbon was a hotbed of spies and treachery because we had all the nations together, but it was a neutral country. Mm. So a Nazi could be sitting across a roulette table from a Brit, and so on. And I originally conceived that much of the story would take place in Lisbon. But Gulbenkian comes into the story, and one of the elements that's important is that Gulbenkian put together a massive art collection, and you can still see most of it today in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. And I then led me down a path of thinking about all that art that was looted from Jewish families, rich Jewish families before the war. And that then basically gave me, I'm sorry, I'm using the words basically too much, but it gave me the fundamental driver of the story. And then the American side came in as a subplot. But it's really the principal part of the book is about art that was looted from Jews before the war, somehow ends up in London. Gulbenkian from afar wants to buy it. And then all sorts of skullduggery takes place.
Wonderful stuff. Let's talk about your process, because you do immerse yourself in your research, particularly the specific period. And you mentioned those specific months. Did you choose those months for a reason? Were they a great confluence of events that were great for drama?
You know, I usually pick the date before working out whether it's big for drama. And the period of my next book, which I've picked, which is spring 1943, is not as dramatic as some of the previous periods. But however, it's still pretty interesting. So, I did. I can't remember if I picked the date of my book that's set in December of 1941. I think that book, That's a Death in Mayfair. That has, of course, the background of Pearl Harbor and stuff like that, which goes into the book. And my second book was set against the background of the Battle of Britain. So that obviously is quite an interesting period too. But I think all of them are interesting. When you go deep down, you find there are lots of things, very strange things. I mean, it's not going to be part of my book or anything today, but I tweeted something which I discovered very odd, that on this day in 1942, British Army invaded Madagascar. And Madagascar was controlled by the Vichy French. So the Vichy French were, of course, on the other side. Yeah. So we went to battle with Vichy French, won, and then a year later handed over to de Gaulle's Free French. And I just thought that's a sort of obscure little bit, but it's not going to feature. I'd love to feature it in my books, but I think it's the wrong time. You know, it's before my last book. I can't do it. But there are always funny little things like that just crop up that, you can use in the books. But you have to be careful also that, you don't shove things in book. Oh, look how clever I am. I know this. Shovel it all in there, and then people get bored.
But talk about, so you, before you write your first draft, you spend, I read somewhere, I think like 3 or 4 months immersing yourself in the period. What have you found to be the best resources for researching historical fiction?
When I started out, when I was writing my first book, which I didn't really know what the heck I was doing anyway, it took me quite a long time. And so that was in around about, I think I started 2005, 2006, and then it was published in 2011. I used to go to Kew Public Records Office because the internet was not so advanced then. Right. And I used to go through all the old newspapers, looking at interesting headlines. And that was great. I really did enjoy that. And the bottom line now is that you don't need to go to libraries. I still go to libraries, but you can get an awful lot on the internet. If you want to find out what the weather was like on a particular day in London or in Oxford or wherever, you can do it. And, if you want to find out which, in the Battle of Britain, which squadrons were up in the air at a particular time, which weren't, you can do that. Over and above what you can find on the internet, I mean, I've built up a fairly good library of diaries, biographies. Obviously I've got Churchill's books about the war. I've got Alan Brooks' diaries. I've got Harold Nicholson. There's a new edition of Chips Channon has just come out. Right. So I use that too, all that sort of stuff. And then a lot of biographies. So Death in Mayfair, which was book 4, is set against the backdrop of the British film industry. And that was particularly vibrant during the war. There were lots of studios very, very active. So I read some really good books about that. And then I thought, well, I'll read about people like Alexander Korda, the film producer, who was around then. And then I started to read about film stars and who might or might not have shady backgrounds. And I read about Rex Harrison, who had a very interesting life. Mm. And so, Korda, in his own way, finds his way into the book. Part of him finds his way into the book. Part of Rex Harrison gets into the book, and a few other people. So that's how it goes. But I don't, as I say, plan it out. I just sit down and let it go. Or let it come.
I suppose internet research, you can say, right, I need the weather on a specific day, and you put that into a search engine and it comes up. But when you go into someone like Q Public Records or libraries or biographies as well, there are those happy accidents. There are those things you discover that you weren't even looking for and then suddenly seem essential. And I love those moments. Have you had many of those?
Yeah, well, I think I can talk freely about Rex Harrison because he's long dead. He had a very tortured relationship with lots and lots of women. He didn't treat his women very well. Mm. And I was thinking of having a character, a film star character who is a bit on the shady side as regards his sex life and other things too. So yeah, there was lots of material in there that I found. And Alexander Korda, I'd actually read the biography of him many years ago, and he's a fascinating character. But I when he started out in Eastern Europe and made his way to Paris and so on, and then to London, all of that is just great material, I think. Again, when I started writing first, I put way too much of it in, and I trimmed it way back. But I've still got the little bits that I feel happy to have in there now.
Wonderful. And actually, I need to ask you specifically about the weather, because that's something I spent 20 minutes trying to look up and then gave up. What website are you using to find out the weather and on specific days?
I don't think there's a sort of general website. I just look up weather London, whatever day. I mean, admittedly, I'm generally looking at London,
yes.
and not places in the country. Maybe it's more difficult, but there's no specific website. I just put in weather London 1942 May and something comes up. So sorry, I can after this I can go and check my records and see what I did.
That'd be handy. Yeah, I think in the countryside it just becomes so much more difficult. There's just fewer and fewer records. Now, and
of course, you have records of weather. In the records of the especially in the Battle of Britain when the planes were flying and so on.
Yes.
You can work it out through that too.
We've got a fantastic Spitfire museum up the road here, which is really, really handy. And it's a great resource. Now, let's talk about your journey to publication, because you started out as a barrister, but you're also an entrepreneur and did very well as an entrepreneur. Was there anything that you've learned from that entrepreneurial world that you've carried over into your writing? Is there a sort of mindset that you think will help writers?
Never give up.
Right.
So yes, I was a barrister for a while. Then I worked for other people, and I started a computer company with a good friend and partner of mine. And we had many, many times when we could have gone under. There were many, many people who told us we would go under. And somehow or other, we survived and went on and eventually made a success of it. And I think you've got to have the same attitude with writing. You've got to put up with people, and millions of people. Okay, maybe not millions, thousands of people said to me, Mark, it's almost impossible to get published. Just don't bother. Just if you want to do it for your own fun, but you won't make it. And I think we know, when I speak to other writing friends and colleagues, there are the people who've probably got many people who've got the talent to do it, but they haven't got the persistence. You just got to put up with it. You had with my first book, I sent it out left, right, and centre. I think maybe I got, out of 100 applications, maybe I got one person saying, well, you might have something, but they wouldn't take the book on. And I self-published the first book, and I self-published the first 2 books. And what happened, and then I found a smaller publishing company called Accent Press in Wales. And then in due course, Accent Press got taken over by Hachette. So now I'm published by Hachette, and Hachette are getting behind me and giving me a lot of support and are very encouraging and think I'm not wasting my time, thank God. So so that's how it all happened. But you know, and when you self-publish, I think the attitude to self-publishing is changing a bit now. And I have one or two friends who do very well as self-published authors and write very good work. And they had been published by what's one traditionally published, as one says.
Yes.
But they decided they'd do better self-published, which is interesting. But I certainly, when I got my first book self-published in 2011, now there was a very sniffy attitude to it, and I remember going to a dinner party, and some people had invited me, hearing I'd written a book, and when I told the guy, and he was a writer in the art world, when I told him I'd self-published, it was all very, very sniffy, and I never got invited back, but dog horror. It's not the end of the world.
No, not at all.
I think I'm glad the attitude has changed, but also I'm glad that I'm with a very good publisher, who did an excellent editing job on this book and have been very, very positive and very helpful.
Wonderful stuff. Excellent. That's really cool to know. So what's coming next? Are there going to be more Frank Merlin? Because the plan is, I believe, it's to get through the whole war with Frank, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably another 4 or 5 books, as I say, as long as I don't drop dead. But I do have other ideas. I mean, my first idea, before I thought about doing World War II, and I still have it at the back of my mind, is a Daniel Defoe type fictional character in the end of the 17th century, because I think that Daniel Defoe is fascinating. Not only did he write Robinson Crusoe, but he was a spy, he was a pamphleteer, he was a businessman, he was a bit of a crook. And I thought I could have someone like him in a rather George MacDonald Fraser type mode, writing his memoirs and going back to all sorts of interesting things that happened in the late 17th century. I mean, the late 17th century is not an area that's been unplowed. There are some excellent books recently have come up set in 18th century London, but I still have that in the back of my mind. But meanwhile, I feel, it's been a long haul to get sort of Frank Merlin recognized and appreciated. And, now, the books are doing well. So I think I better stick at it for another 4 books at least. And then that's not to say I couldn't write 2 books at the same time, but that might be a bit of a stretch. So as I said, the next book, I haven't got a title for it yet, will be Spring 1943. I have a few rough ideas mingling in my mind. I've been reading some royal biographies about the royal family, or lesser figures of the royal family, some of whom, again, got into some sort of interesting, shady experiences, which I could fictionalize, or, sometimes, as I think I have the real characters there and I have the fictional characters, and you can mix them all up a bit. So those are the ideas that are sort of blending in my mind. But I've only just started that 2 or 3 months of research, and usually something else will shoot out at me. The Madagascar thing is no use, but something like that will crop up, and I'll think, okay, let's give that one a go.
Wonderful stuff. Can't wait. Really looking forward to it. Mark Ellis, thank you so much for speaking to us today, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Mark. It's a great pleasure.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Now, I think Mr. Mark Ellis, I have to say his surname so we don't get confused here, Mr. Stay. But Mark's approach. I love this idea of picking a period in time and kind of working your way through it, and but kind of like breaking it into small chunks, because something about creating those boundaries is something that I absolutely love. The idea that you just have to focus in that, in that first few months of the year, or the third months of the year, whatever it might be for this. Absolutely brilliant.
It's very I mean, our books are very different. Mine are sort of magical. His are very much grounded in reality. But I do exactly the same thing. So the first 3 books of my series are set June, July, August of 1940. And one of the first things I did when starting a draft for each book was because you go on Wikipedia and you can go, what happened in that month? And you can go through and go, oh, okay, that happened and this was happening. Okay. So you can drop in little mentions of it as you go through. And you're right, it gives you little touch points, little kind of boundaries that you can work with, which is really, really useful. And inspires little story nuggets and moments in the story. So yeah, I love all that. And of course, it's all there online to look up now, better than ever before.
And I really respect authors who sit down and write an entire dynasty or an entire era. But I think the challenge with that is it's just so vast and huge. And when you create these boundaries, I always talk about how you can simplify writing, how you can simplify your life by just working, making decisions for yourself. A bit like how Peter Gabriel once said, as a musician, he said he loved a project he once did where he just did covers of other artists, because in the past it was like this open, infinite world of like, well, what shall I create? I could do anything. But when you're given a cover, you know a lot about, you know a lot of things already before you even start. So you're starting from a place of simplicity. And so if an author's listening to this thinking, I've really been struggling, got kind of lost in the quagmire of time in my novel, maybe it's about time that you pulled in the beginning and the end of it, the start date and the end date, and give yourself something to focus on. I think that's a fascinating approach. Yeah,
I do. It's something I've only noticed recently, is that I tend to write stuff that takes place in a very compressed time period. I've never really written much that takes place over a year. It's usually in a week. Funnily enough, book 4 takes place over about 36 hours. It's really short. I love that compressed time period, because I think if I allow myself to say, and then cut to 1 year later, I won't know what to do with that. I like squeezing it on. Because the other thing as well, when you're writing a story, particularly if it's full length story, you are often, you're taking a character, you're taking them on a journey of change, and very often it's the most important thing that's happened in their life. It's the big pivotal moment in their life. It's where something, we talk about the hero's journey. They wake up one morning, an ordinary person, there's something extraordinary happens, and it's how they are never the same again. And even if you're writing a series where you've got a recurring character, this will be the most important thing that happens to them that day, that week, that month. So you have to think in that way of, okay, this changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good thing to think about. And I think a lot of people miss it because you think about character development. I think this is where the problem comes in. You talk about developing a character, and we instantly think, well, how do we develop as characters in our own life? Well, we develop over a period of time, a longer period of time. But a character can learn a lot in 36 hours or even a week or a month. So yeah, good thing to kind of hang on to there. The other thing that I found really interesting was this idea of researching up front, and actually researching a lot up front. And we've heard the kind of different takes on this. We've heard Ian Rankin talk about, don't do much research up front, fill in the blanks, once you've finished the first draft. But there's something to be said for both. But I think it requires a certain level of fascination in a subject to do 3 to 4 months of research on it up front, do you think?
Yeah. I set my books during the war because I have a fascination with it and a certain level of knowledge. But they say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I go in cautiously, and my focus is on the characters and the story. And then, because like I said in last week's episode, I finished the first draft of the novel, and now I'm realizing where the gaps are and I'm filling them in. I'm also watching films set in the period that are giving me ideas for little layers of stuff that I can sprinkle in to give it that sort of layer of authenticity. But then you do, there is a certain amount you have to do up front. Now, whether you do that just because it's an interest and it's something you've always read about, that's fine. But if you want to get into the specifics, I mean, the thing with Mark Ellis's books, they're set in London. He picks the time period. So at least he's narrowing that down. He's saying, okay, for this book, he's talking about the summer of 1942. Okay, let's look at the summer of what happened then? What was, we've got the Blitz in London, and the crime in London and all that kind of stuff. So he can focus it down, and then he's finding little gems that will inspire him to write on. And I think that's a really smart way of doing it. What he's not doing is opening every tome written about the Second World War, and blimey, there are a few of those, and flicking through and going, gosh, have I got to remember all this? Have I got to, that is the road to misery, I think.
But you know what? Let's just futurecast for a minute. Imagine an author in 50 to 100 years from now coming back to the summer of 2022. Talk about tomes. I mean, you think about how much information has been created on the internet. So in some ways, it's a blessing to pick something pre-internet that was only in print as opposed to digital, because and this brings me on to this subject about how the internet has changed research and writing. Because as I was listening to that interview, it suddenly struck me, and it's absolutely obvious when you think about it. But I kind of started to think, what did people do before the internet? And we went to museums, we went to libraries, we talked to people who lived in those periods. But the internet's changed everything, hasn't it? Because we're almost, it's a curse and a blessing. There's almost so much information that we can access, plus all the stuff that's been archived historically pre-internet as well. And it really has changed, I think, maybe the level of detail that people can go into if they want because of the internet. But is that a curse?
It's like you say, it's a curse and a blessing. And I can tell you the blessing of archive research. So for Book 4 of Woodville, I went to the Post Office Archives, which is next to the Post Office Museum in London. It's absolutely wonderful. They gave me because because one of my characters is a postman in the fourth book, and it's an area that I didn't really know about. And I asked my postie about it. He said, "Go to the museum, go to the archives. You can book a slot there." And there was a monthly magazine for postmen and post office workers that ran up to September 1939. So, and then it stopped because the war came along. So they had to save paper and stuff like that. But I'm flicking through these old episodes, just looking for nuggets. But the thing that delighted me the most and told me more about the life of someone who worked in the post office in that period were the adverts, the magazine adverts. They were saying, there were things like, these are the shoes that, if you're a postman, these are the shoes you want. These are the bicycles that they bought. This was there were lots of adverts saying, join the civil service, do this, take this exam. There were lots of little adverts about betterment. You're a postman, but maybe you could be a civil servant kind of thing. Take this exam, send off for this course. That helped me shape the character. I was thinking, okay, he's someone who maybe resents what he's doing and wants to be a better person, but he's been, so it sparked all this little stuff sweets that they would use, cigarettes, tobacco, and it really helped. Now with the internet, you don't get that. I mean, we have things like the Internet Archive, but the magazines, I've got every issue of Empire magazine over there on the shelf. And you go back to, Empire was 89 it started. So you look at those adverts for the early 90s, full of VHS videotapes, full of hi-fi, things that we just don't really think about now, So it's the context of the printed page is so important when you're researching, because it tells you how people live. Some of my favorite accounts on Twitter are things like they have pages from the old Argos catalogs, and they'll have things, and it tells you so much about how people lived. So that archive research, I still think, is really, really, really important. But if I do want to find out what the weather is, and I have found ways of doing it, you can Google it, and that stuff is immediate, and it doesn't mean I have to go to the bloody Met Office and book an appointment or stuff like that. So there's a, like I say, there's a blessing and a curse. Absolutely.
The other thing that Mark mentioned as well, which was interesting, is he kind of alluded to his kind of pre-writing career when he was a very, very successful entrepreneur. But it made me actually wonder, people who it made me think about what people do before they start writing. And more importantly, how the things that they do before they start a writing career as such actually can be an incredible help to them. And even maybe I go as far as saying a preparation for them. And weirdly enough, I was coaching someone just this week who told me that they currently work in the post office in the US.
Oh,
and they
wow.
which is kind of bizarre. And they want to shift into the music industry. And I was relating to them how actually a lot of the things that they've learned, the discipline that they've learned in the routine of what they have to do, and they have to plan the route and they have to think ahead. I said, all that stuff's going to be huge for you when you move into a new career. And I think a lot of people always look at their previous careers and think, it was a dead end job or something I hated or didn't enjoy. But you can always see that there's training happening for the thing that you're moving into. And to actually embrace that and then think, no, actually, this is a good thing. This is worth throwing myself into. But in Mark's case, it made me think about how being an entrepreneur can be incredible training to become a writer. Because actually, writers, I think, are entrepreneurs, especially indie writers. You have to be entrepreneurial.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's much overlooked, I think, and it's why that he said never give up. That's going to be the phrase for this week's podcast. That's going to be the title of this week's podcast because it's a simple message. I mean, as an entrepreneur, he said, you have naysayers, you have people saying you can't do it, you have rejections, you have money problems, you come to the brink of failure. Mm-hmm. But if you give up and step away, then that's the 100% way of failing, and that's it, game over. But if you persist, then you do increase your chances of success. There's no guarantee of success, but you do increase your chances exponentially. So I think you're right. And of course, when you're up and running as a writer, that entrepreneurial thing has to keep going. You've got to market yourself, you've got to publicize yourself, you've got to keep the money coming in, you've got to make sure you don't get screwed by a publisher. All of those little things that go to keeping the money coming in.
Well, for indie writers out there as well, I mean, you think about, and that's the vast majority of writers now in the world, people that are kind of self-publishing and in indie. When you think about it, writing is a portion of what you do during your week. The rest of the time, you're running a publishing company. I mean, people don't think of it like that, but I think if you're writing a book and you're going to self-publish it, you run a publishing company and actually own it. Absolutely embrace the fact that that's what you're doing, because that then ties you into the fact that there is this entrepreneurial spirit around what you're creating. And whether it's a book or whether it's, Mark's case, it was a technology company that he set up in the 90s, which went massive and was very successful. But, it doesn't matter ultimately what you're doing entrepreneurially, all the things that you're focusing on, whether it's the product or the marketing of that product, the creation of fans or customers, it's all part of the same thing. And I think if people are willing to embrace that, or willing to take small steps to start and realizing that they are entrepreneurs or a mini entrepreneur, like whatever feels safe and comfortable for you, you're going to grow within that space and you're going to become better at it. You're going to become more successful at it the more you do it. So, and again, I think it's no surprise that Mark has done so well in his career because of the fact that he's always pushed forward. He's always found a way. And there's, everything kind of just almost replicated what he's done in his previous career as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Onwards, upwards, it's just when you think, I've had a very dodgy month. I've had such a roller coaster month this month. There's stuff I can't talk about, but there's like, oh, really? Oh, yeah. And the wind really, really goes out your sails, and you'll have a day. I mean, I had a day yesterday where I had some news, and I was like, oh, and you
was
just
it
think,
kick in the pants, was it?
It was, it was a bit. But you get through it. This too shall pass. You'll have the good times, you have the great times when things are wonderful, and you're gonna have the crappy times too. And you just have to ride out the storm.
You do. You know what they say, Mark? As you start getting the higher highs, you also get the lower lows.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes, as things start to really grow and develop for a writer in their career and anything you do in life, that, and you get these higher highs. When the lows come, there's a bigger drop, right? If you think about it, someone on top of a mountain falling down the mountain, there's more to go. And it's how you get through those lower lows and recognizing that the reason why you're getting those lower lows is because you're actually really, really moving forward in the career. But it doesn't look at the stock market. If you want a model, you know what? It's never dull and boring. It's always up, down every single minute of every single day. And I always think about the roller coaster of life. And I always say this to people, I remind my clients who do it, coaching and academy, I always say to people, the last thing you want in life is a constant, all right? Because a constant is basically a flat line on a graph. And what's a flat line? You don't want that in life. It's about the roller coaster. It's about the highs and the lows. It's how you celebrate the highs and you deal with the lows. It's life.
It's funny you should say that. The last couple of years at Orion, the nature of my job changed. And I was basically looking at spreadsheets all day. And I did not sign up to look at spreadsheets all day. And I was flatlining, it was that flatline.
Felt like
so, I would much rather have the day I had yesterday with the kick in the pants, knowing that there's going to be, a wonderful moment around the corner, I hope.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And all the joy that's come with it, rather than staring at another bloody Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, well, this is it, right? Absolutely. So, And it's good. It's great to share all that stuff because you know what? As I said, it's the human experience. Every single person listening right now, listening to this at this very minute, has either had an amazing day or an absolutely crappy day, or maybe somewhere in between. But there's going to be there's going to be people thinking, oh, I'm having a great day, and others just worst day ever. So the podcast is here to lift you up. If you've had a bad day, the podcast is here to lift you up. And if you're having a great day, it's about celebrating the fact that those days are great. And you know what? That's the celebration of life in all of its. And that's why I coach, Mark. I'm so fascinated by the human journey and the human experience. And I'm slowly myself just starting to understand it. It's and that's what it's about. It's like there's never a point when we get to the end of our life and we'll have figured it all out and have all the answers. It's just continually fascinating and mind-blowing. So if you're having a hard day today, folks, tomorrow will be a better day.
Yes.
So or slightly less bad. If you put it in that context. Brilliant stuff. So Mr. Stay, talking of celebrations and talking about the highs, let's celebrate some of the stories that we've had this week on email and social media.
This is wonderful. So Kate Baker, who's with the Academy, and she said, one of my goals with the Bestseller Academy back in December when she joined up was to buy a turntable when she had a decent piece of writing news. So when the people at the Book Guild told me they would be publishing my novel on the 28th of February, 2023, guess what I bought? And she's got this wonderful turntable in a little case. It looks fantastic. And she said, my vinyls need dusting. So, Kate, fantastic that you've achieved your goal. Her book's coming 28th of February. You're going to be hearing more and more about this book, trust me, because I had the chance to read it and it's terrific. Big congrats on that, Kate. That's terrific news.
And brilliant, Kate. And we should explain to everyone listening that this is actually a thing that we do in the Academy. One of the first things you do when you sign up, you create a thing called a dream declaration, which is what we talk about on the podcast. A lot of people are scared to do it, but it's all about sharing your goal vulnerably with everyone else in the Academy. Everyone else has to do it. But the other really fun part of that is that you have to say when you want to try and achieve it by, and most importantly, what you're going to do when you achieve it. And we've had the best. I've never heard of buying a record player. That is absolutely brilliant. Nice. But we have had adopting a puppy.
Yep.
Which was absolutely brilliant. We've had many bouts of drinking various very very ancient bottles of whiskey. We've had spa days. We've had, I think one of the best ones was treating my family to a weekend away. I love that one. It's just like that. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. So, it's about, and so I want everyone to think about this. I want you to think about how you will celebrate when you reach a milestone, because too many of us just pass that milestone. Oh, great. Yeah, book's out. Right. On to the next thing. You've got to stop and enjoy and celebrate the moment. So if you want to do that in the Academy, actually, I think that's one of the best things about the Academy, the fact that when you come in, you have to do this dream declaration. So if you want to get involved in that, maybe start thinking about what your dream declaration might be for the next milestone you want to reach in your writing journey.
Speaking of declarations, Inkborn Blade. So Inkborn Blade, who is amazing on Twitter, do check out Inkborn Blade. Back in January, he said he set a couple of public declarations. So he hit his first one, which at the end of January was to finish the current draft, and then he sent second one by the end of July. I'll have finished first draft of a new murder mystery crime thriller. So I chased up Inkborn Blade just before the deadline, because I do put these in my diary, and he got back to me, said it's finished, all the words are typed out, though they might not be in the right order. That's a job for round 2 later in the year. He's written 75 words. There's a beginning, middle and an end, and the killer gets their just desserts. It's a new genre for me, so I enjoyed getting to grips with different conventions. So huge congrats to Inkborn Blade. That Inkborn Blade, let us not forget, was the person who did his 200 words a day on the morning of his wedding. So,
yes. And I love that idea. I think I want to redefine or rename the ending of the first draft to, I finished my book, it's just the words are in the wrong order. That's absolutely lovely.
Yeah, it's the old Morecambe and Wise joke, isn't it? He's playing the piano. He says, I'm playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order. And we've got a new public declaration. I mentioned Steve Gowland. I met Steve and Donna Gowland at the RNA conference a few weeks ago, which is lovely to meet them. Steve gave me a copy of his new book, Imagine the Fire, which is beautiful, beautiful cover. So Steve said he's set a new public declaration. So he's intending to write a book, but then he's been self-publishing up to now, but this one is going to tout around agents and publishers. And if nothing happens within a year, he's going to release it himself. So I said, oh, that sounds a lot like a public declaration, Steve. Do you want to make it official? So he has. So yes, he says it'll be finished by the end of September or in 66 days. So that is in the diary, Steve. Fingers crossed. We'll come back to that if and when it happens. I'm sure it will. He's an absolute machine, Steve. So looking forward to that.
Good luck, Steve. Brilliant.
So, folks, if you want to drop us a line, if you want to get in touch on social media, talk about anything, you can talk about your public declarations, you can talk about your wins, you can just talk about the weather. If you want, drop us a line, go to bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. We're Bestseller Experiment on Facebook, and on Twitter and Instagram, we are at BestsellerXP. And if you've been inspired by Mark or any of the other authors who've been on the show, leave us a rating. Wherever you got downloaded this podcast from, there'll be some way to rate us or give us a star rating. Make it a nice one, make it positive. Tell all your writer friends, come and find us, and we can hear about their stories too.
Brilliant stuff. And it just got me thinking, Mark, how many marks have we had on the podcasts? I can't even think. We must be up to about 12, maybe.
There's a lot of us about.
We've got a discipleship going, possibly. Yeah. It's marvelous. If anyone knows that, maybe they could look back through. No, that would be hard work. But,
I can probably do it. I got the spreadsheet. I can probably do it.
We do want people to know, though, that if they're listening to this podcast for the first time, after all that stuff you said about spreadsheets,
bloody spreadsheets.
Oh, here we go.
When I die, the last thing I see is going to be a poxy Excel spreadsheet.
But if you are listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome and thank you for coming all the way to the end with us. But I do want you to know that we do interview other authors other than authors named Mark. Yes. Just so you're aware, it's not a weird cult thing. It's not a weird cult thing that Mark and I like to do. But anyway, we hope you have a fantastic writing week. We really look forward to joining you again next week, hopefully to inspire you just a little bit more in your writing journey. And you know what, folks, make this week a good week of writing. Break through some of those challenges you've got. Pick up your pen, dust off the computer keyboard if it's not been turned on for a while, and write something fun. Take Mr. Mark Ellis's advice and write something that you love, that you're fascinated about, that you'd love to spend a few months researching because you just want to learn more about it. Delve, dive, and enjoy yourselves. And until next week, it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.